So I know this kid, a kind of friend of the family's, and he comes round and he visits the old Earthship here in Brisbane. And he says, geez, dude, this place looks kind of like Luke Skywalker's digs in Tatooine. And I go, huh? And he goes on, yeah, you know, the old Star Wars dome and the thick walls and no windows and render. And I go, yeah, really? I am talking the environment, sustainable housing, living off the grid, and you connect to some old sci-fi movie. For mine, Earthships in some ways are like a metaphor for life itself. And I get all sorts of feedback on this thing, both good and bad. And I think, well, I just need to roll with it. Not buy into any comments and just have faith in what I do because I can control that. So the next day I'm out there running, you know, aerobics in the mighty Whites Hill Nature Reserve. And it's like the council have decided to preserve a small piece of bushland. It's a great place. So I'm running the track. It's a time when I sometimes do my best thinking. You get a kind of buzz, discard the clutter. And I start thinking about this kid's comments. And I sort of conclude, well, he's right in a way. If you think of the 1977 Star Wars film, you know, Lucas decides, you know, to film it there on location in Tunisia. And it's a barren landscape, hostile, devoid of water. One of the reasons I got into Earthships was that I felt that mainland Australia will possibly need to adapt to a changing environment, especially in the face of a warming climate. And, you know, I don't think it's controversial anymore to buy into the science that the Earth is getting warmer. You know, the albedo effect is on the ropes, and the effects will almost certainly show up in some shape or form in the Great Southern Land. You know, 10 years ago in Brisbane, yeah, we experienced drought-like conditions due to a very aggressive and prolonged El Nino event. And currently, well, it's only a matter of time before that monster comes back. Look, if things get too rough, with no water, no green, and unable to afford air conditioning, then what will happen? If you have a job and savings, look, I suppose you could try and migrate southwards. But as this Star Wars kid alludes to, maybe there's another approach on the table. Maybe we could try and adapt better to the reality of the environment. So like the movie, homes embed themselves within the earth and tap into the temperature of the berm. This guy in New Mexico that I saw all those years ago, his message has always been about developing practical systems, okay, to handle food, water, energy, shelter. So how does one capture water, reuse water, take responsibility for self, you know, rather than look upwards to the welfare? So although this comment rocked me somewhat, you know, suddenly I had a new perspective. You know, out there with the blinking spotted gums and the tallow woods. It's one thing for countries to adopt clean energies, but the reality of the accord is that worldwide, combined greenhouse gas emissions are still growing hand over fist. Weather events like El Nino will become more severe, more drought, more bushfires. So I'm not so sure the average citizen with the average job and the average home and the average Australian city is going to do very well. In 1977, I was a teenager and my life stretched out miles in front of me. At that time, I was penciled to join in the military, but then this film came out. It was important to me as I interpret it as a kind of coming of age film. And in that way, it was relevant to what's going on inside of me, I guess. The film, for me, was never about special effects or buying merch. For mine, the whole point was the epic nature of the story, and the underlying themes and the philosophy towards life. In short, the filmmakers got the story right. It's like a hero's odyssey. I was a young man and I suppose was interested in some pointers about what sort of life I should want for myself. Sure, I had the luxury of some, pretty darn impressive music tracks from the 60s and 70s, seminal in fact, but art in the form of cinema, well, for me, it was a game changer. In The Empire Strikes Back, the follow-up film, and that bit where he goes into the cave and confronts his worst fears and then learns to deal with the shadow self. Again, they got the story right. Now the protagonist is developing a kind of personalized skill, comes back a stronger self, and aligns himself to a noble cause. As I said, it cuts across cultures. It's a standard fare across all religious scripture and provides a common reference point for society, for the world. Now, I have met some persons, these people, they come to me and it's like, niet comrade, dude. It's a mere flick. Okay, but I also think it's much more than that. I connect to that statement about, be careful if you destroy God and don't have anything else to replace it with. It's all well and good to have empirical evidence and cold hard science, and you can celebrate Charles Darwin there and the origin of the species, but Noah's Ark, I suppose, and the Garden of Eden story, if you undermine a religious paradigm that has existed for thousands of years, then you better have something just as powerful to take its place. People need to have something that, double clicks the hearts and minds of the individual. Your spirit cannot be a blank slate. And when a vacuum is allowed to grow, in my experience, that space will invite in other entities, and none too pleasant. One of my real good friends from Cambodia, you get him on the bears, and eventually he starts opening up about the 70s. How an idea for power can morph into a very cruel totalitarian state. Your individual life can very quickly have no value. You are like collateral damage in the glory of the empire. It's like that scene in Mandalorian where old Bill Burr there outlines what he thinks about Operation Cinder. The message is quite relevant to modern day. It's a good show, I have to say, and what connects with me anyway. I think it's fair to say me along with a whole heap of peeps have been waiting, probably nearly 40 years for the creative spirit from the industry to return to the brass tacks of what made, Star Wars a great story. People always recognize good art. It's something to respond to and they get inspired by.